There's a number of points I want to make, and I have to say the only person I have serious disagreements with here is Jerry. But since I'm friends with him, I think it'll all work out fine. The first thing I want to say is, I mean, these are both mostly reminders. Queer neighborhoods are new phenomenons. I mean, nobody has any evidence that they existed before the 20th century. So we're dealing with a phenomenon where people are finding each other and establishing communities around sex, looking for relationships, or looking for safety, as Ruth pointed out, just being safe around each other. There is no model for this. This is a new experiment, so there isn't a sure way to proceed. We, as people did in the 60s and 70s, we have to make this up as we go along, and nobody's going to do it except us. Nobody from the outside is going to, if we want to have queer neighborhoods, nobody's going to do it for us. We have to figure out how to do it. Otherwise, it simply will not exist. So that's the one thing I want to remind you of. The second is that cities do not evolve. I'm not going to get into a long discussion about the misuse of the concept of evolution, but it certainly does not apply to cities. In fact, I started thinking about this really, there was a great show at the Getty about 3 or 4 years ago called Building the Great City, City Planning Theory in Eastern Europe. And it was a brilliant show with many great papers written on the subject, and it was basically about the last 200 years of city planning, basically focused on Eastern Europe. And what big cities in the West are a new phenomenon. We are making this up collectively as we go along. In the 18th century, cities were not multi-million population things. 1 million people was a rare thing. Nothing, if cities are not man-made, nothing is. These are not natural, cities are not natural phenomenon. There is no natural process about them. People make cities, not individually, as much as great kings and emperors have tried, and sometimes succeeded, but even Akhenaten could only make his capital last a few years, and it was abandoned upon his death. But through public policy, through concepts of city planning, theories of city planning, and through individual acts and through group acts, cities are created. They are not created individually, but we do create cities collectively. They are what we have made them. Cities in Europe are different than cities in America, and there's a reason for that, because they've had half a century of socialist policies and government control, and in countries like France, there's a very different idea of the state than there is in the United States. So there's a lot of reasons for this, but we can look to models like Portland has been very aggressive about how they shape their city. The cities in Europe have been the same way. So I really, in talking about this, people say, well, maybe this is just a natural process, cities evolve. It's not true. We make it this way. We create the economic policies that have these things happen. We make the individual choices that make these things happen. I just cannot reiterate that enough. We're our own worst enemies, in a sense. The other thing that I want to say is, and this is actually what happened. I mean, people made individual choices or group choices to move to District 8. And it happened because of people's choices. People chose to create businesses. People chose to create nonprofits. This was intentional. It wasn't like somebody was directing it, but that doesn't mean it wasn't intentional. So we did create this, and there was actually at that time a great deal of idealism about the future and what it might be and what San Francisco might be as a kind of visionary way of living together. I and everybody I knew lived in flats with 4 or 5 people, with people floating in and out, and I was thinking that actually is a kind of a model for living. I mean, why should we be living couples with maybe a kid just like heterosexuals. Why not have more fluid kinds of living spaces, living models, new models of ownership, new collective, you know, the radical fairies took a stab at it with the radical fairy houses, which had varying degrees of success, and Wolf Creek and other places like that where they tried to create alternative spaces for queer people. So there is a precedent for this, and we really, we lost so many people. We lost so many talented people, brilliant, hardworking people. But it's time to, regroup and really start thinking about the future, not just as being safe, but what can we really accomplish that's new. The immediate circumstance for the Castro Coalition is the Market Octavia plan, which goes up to Noe Street. There's going to be hundreds of new units built along Market Street. And they're talking about 400-foot towers at Market and Van Ness. What are these units going to be like? What are they going to sell for? Who's going to move into them? What are the businesses that are going to be in these new buildings? These are all questions that the community really has to start talking about, because it's going to happen. I mean, in spite of everything Tommy has said, you haven't seen nothing yet. So if there is going to be a future for a queer neighborhood in the Castro, and I'm not overly optimistic. I mean, I think it would be it's important, for all the reasons that have been listed. But I'm by no means sanguine that it's a sure thing. But we really start talking about this. And what the reason for what we're doing here now is really to start a public conversation. And it has to be an ongoing conversation, and it needs to include as many people as possible, both who live in the Castro and people who use the Castro or care about the Castro or care about queer neighborhoods in San Francisco in general, because obviously it's not the only queer area. It just has this certain symbolic and cultural significance that that has become emblematic. And this conversation should both happen in print, and it needs to happen in people in a public forum, so other people can hear what other people think. Because, I've been participating in different neighborhood organizations and meetings for many years, and have attended the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association meetings about Market Octavia and about 55 Laguna for many years. And it really works. It really works to have these public conversations where people hear other opinions about different issues, and it actually is a good thing. And I think for too long, the neighborhood organizations in the Castro have not really talked about the future of the Castro as a whole. Developers go to them about some project, and they manage to get a meeting space out of it. There really hasn't been the kind of organized thought about a neighborhood or organized negotiations with new development that I've seen in other neighborhoods like Hayes Valley, where it gets serious and it gets thoughtful, and there's like this ongoing conversation. We really need to have that about District 8. We really need to have a public conversation in District 8 about the queer aspects, about all the things that Tommy has mentioned. And, we can't dictate what will happen, but if we don't attempt it, it will not turn out the way we want it. I can guarantee that. There at least has to be an attempt.